It was my final week at home before heading back to college, a period that should have been filled with nostalgic goodbyes and last-minute preparations. Instead, it was marked by an unsettling mystery that still haunts me. My parents had recently moved into an older house, a downsized version of our previous family home, a decision they'd made once I was off to higher education. I'd only visited the new place a handful of times, enough for a basic tour and a rundown of its quirks. One detail they'd been particularly definitive about was the absence of a basement. Only a crawl space existed for utilities, they'd insisted. I never gave it a second thought. My parents had left for a week-long vacation, leaving me with the house to myself. The quiet was initially a welcome change, a chance to enjoy some solitude before the chaos of college life resumed. But that solitude was soon broken. On a Tuesday night, as I lay in bed drifting towards sleep, a rhythmic tapping began. It was consistent, both in its cadence and its volume, emanating from directly beneath my first-floor room. My initial thoughts drifted to the mundane, the heating system, pipes settling, the usual creaks and groans of an old house. But it didn't stop. The relentless, steady tapping persisted, forcing me to question my rationalizations. I got up, pacing the room, trying to pinpoint the source. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a disembodied rhythm echoing from the earth beneath me. The disturbing part was the knowledge that, according to my parents, there was nothing but a crawl space down there. The idea of sounds originating from a supposedly uninhabitable void beneath the house was genuinely unsettling. Eventually, the tapping ceased and exhaustion finally claimed me. I fell asleep, convincing myself it was just the house settling, or perhaps a nocturnal creature scuttling in the crawl space. I was dead wrong. The next night, around the same time, the tapping returned. This time it was noticeably louder, more insistent. I tried to dismiss it again, to sleep through it, but a deeper sense of unease had taken root. The third night, however, brought an escalation that shattered any remaining pretense of normalcy. The tapping was no longer alone. It was accompanied by dragging and scraping sounds, like something heavy being pulled across a rough surface, or claws raking against wood. It was primal, guttural, and terrifying. My logical brain fought to find a reasonable explanation, but none came. The sounds were too clear, too purposeful to be dismissed as mere house noises. I began to wonder if my parents had been mistaken about the basement, or if there was some hidden access point I was unaware of. Either way, sitting in that dark room, surrounded by the cacophony from below, was a chilling experience. The next morning, I called my parents, recounting the strange occurrences. My dad, ever the pragmatist, suggested checking the crawl space for animals. The thought filled me with dread, but I knew I had no choice. The entrance was under the porch, requiring me to get dirty and confront whatever might be lurking beneath. Holding my breath, I ventured into the cramped, dusty space. There was nothing. No animals, no signs of disturbance. My dad seemed satisfied, but I wasn't. The lack of answers only fueled my frustration. Determined to find an explanation, I began to search the perimeter of the house. I noticed a pile of old construction materials, lumber, tarps, concrete blocks, leaning against the side of the house. They looked like remnants of a forgotten renovation, something I'd always overlooked. As I started moving them, hoping to uncover a hidden entry point for animals, I found something far more sinister. Concealed behind the debris was a storm door, partially painted over, clearly unused for years. It was a legitimate entrance. My heart pounded as I opened it, revealing a set of concrete steps leading down into an unmistakable basement. My parents had been wrong. Terribly, terrifyingly wrong. I didn't want to go down there. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to lock the door and pretend I'd never seen it. But a morbid curiosity, a desperate need for answers propelled me forward. In the brief moments I spent in that subterranean space, two horrifying truths became clear. First, someone had been living there. Empty food containers were scattered across the floor. Undeniable evidence of a recent illicit occupancy. Second, whoever had been living there was not a typical homeless person. The walls, particularly the wooden foundation pillars, were covered in disturbing markings. Tally marks, like a macabre calendar, were scratched into one pillar. Another bore demonic drawings. Grotesque depictions of people and animals, twisted and disturbing in ways I still struggle to articulate. I didn't stay any longer than necessary. It was and remains the freakiest scene I've ever stumbled upon. I immediately called my parents, their shock palpable even through the phone. They swore they had no idea about the basement, let alone its recent occupant. My dad, his voice laced with concern, asked repeatedly if anyone was still down there. I reassured him, though my own certainty was wavering. They promised to cut their vacation short and return home immediately. The first thing I did after hanging up was buy a heavy-duty padlock. I secured the storm door from the outside, a futile attempt to reclaim a sense of safety, to keep the intruder from returning. That same night, I was jolted awake by aggressive banging and rattling coming from outside. It was unmistakable. Someone was trying to get back into the basement, their frustration evident in the violent assault on the newly locked door. The banging was so loud, so furious, I feared they would break through. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs, unable to move. Then, as suddenly as it began, the banging stopped. Released from my paralysis, I crept to the window, just in time to see a figure sprinting across the backyard, disappearing into the darkness. I couldn't make out any details, but the sight of them fleeing solidified the terrifying reality of the situation. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and adrenaline. The police were called. They searched the house and basement, but found nothing. They could only promise increased patrols. My parents returned the next day, insisting everything would be fine, that they'd find a permanent solution. I left for college as planned, but the experience left me deeply unsettled. Leaving my parents alone with no information about the person who had literally been living in our house felt wrong. It's only been a few days, and I'm still anxiously awaiting news, haunted by those awful markings and sadistic drawings in the basement. I'm terrified of what might happen next. My story shifts now to a different time, a different place, but with a similar undercurrent of unease. I grew up in a small town near the Montana-Idaho border, a place where nothing much ever happens, and that's precisely why I've always stayed. This occurred a long time ago, before cell phones and the constant hum of the internet. My area hasn't changed much since then, which is why the memory remains so vivid. It was late August, one of those transitional days when summer reluctantly gives way to autumn. My morning commute to work was a familiar 2-lane highway, winding through farmland and low hills. About 15 minutes out, I spotted a car pulled off on the shoulder. It was an older, light blue sedan, looking as if it had been there for a while. No hazards flashing, no one in sight, just sitting there, angled slightly towards the ditch. I'm not foolish, but I am the kind of person who helps others. It's how I was raised. I slowed down, trying to get a better look. The car wasn't running, and the interior was empty. No driver, no passenger, no one in the back. It was strange, especially so early in the morning, but not alarming. People break down and walk for help all the time in these parts. I assumed the owner had gone to the nearest farmhouse for assistance and continued on my way. Work beckoned, and it didn't seem like an emergency. By the time I finished work, I'd almost forgotten about the car. But on my drive home, there it was again, in the exact same spot. The only difference was that the driver's side door was now wide open. I was certain it hadn't been like that in the morning. I slowed down again, craning my neck, but still no sign of anyone. No one walking, no tracks in the dirt, just the old car, door agape, as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. This time I couldn't shrug it off. I pulled over where I could get a signal and called the non-emergency line. I described what I'd seen, and the operator thanked me, assuring me someone would investigate. The next morning, the car was gone. I figured that was the end of it. About a week later, while eating breakfast, a local news report caught my attention. The police were investigating a missing person case, something about an abandoned vehicle on a rural highway just outside town. The details matched my experience exactly. I turned up the volume, instantly connecting the dots. They didn't release the man's name, but mentioned the car was registered to an out-of-towner who never reached his destination. The authorities claimed no sign of foul play, no witnesses. I've always been wary of the media, so I wasn't entirely convinced by their narrative. Still, it was eerie to realize I'd been an unwitting observer to the beginning of this mystery. I might even have been the first or only person to report the car. It was a strange feeling, one that wouldn't let me go. Nothing much happens here, and this was far too peculiar to ignore. The next morning, I called my brother, Benjamin, a local firefighter. He works in a nearby town, but we usually hear about the same things. I asked if he had any information from the police. He confirmed they'd received a memo from the sheriff's office about an abandoned vehicle and a missing person. I pressed him about a police search. He wasn't sure, but thought they'd organize one eventually. I suggested we help, maybe get some of the guys from his station involved. He was initially confused by my investment, but I eventually convinced him. I'm still not entirely sure why I was so adamant, but I felt a personal connection to the situation. I left the coordination with the police to Benjamin. Within a couple of days and with official permission, he'd organized a small search party, a few officers, some off-duty firefighters, and me. The search focused on a shallow wooded patch and old irrigation ditches just off the highway. From the road, it looked innocuous, but on foot, it was clear how easy it would be to get lost or disappear. We split into pairs. I, of course, went with Benjamin. About an hour in, one of the pairs radioed in a discovery, something through a break in the brush. We converged quickly. It was an old maintenance shack, half sunken into the ground, overgrown with vegetation, probably unused for years. From the road, it would have been invisible. The door hung slightly open, its lock snapped. Inside, it was dark and musty, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw signs of recent occupation. Empty water bottles and food wrappers deliberately placed. The search team spread out, looking for more evidence. One firefighter spotted something by the back wall. It was a small, clean hole in a wooden board, just above floor level. The edges were sharp, splintered. Unlike any weather or rot damage, it looked exactly like a bullet hole. We searched thoroughly, inside and out, for a shell casing, a slug, or any blood, but found nothing. Just that single, unexplained hole, making no sense given the complete lack of other evidence. The officers radioed in the discovery, their tone indicating this was no longer a simple missing person case. The lead officer gathered us, stating they'd take it from there, and specifically asked me to leave as I was the only civilian. I felt dismissed and frustrated, but complied. Later that evening, Benjamin gave me vague answers about what happened after I left. He eventually admitted the firefighters had also been asked to leave shortly after me. The police had cleared everyone out, taking over the scene entirely. In the following weeks, I waited for updates. Benjamin's contacts claimed they knew no details about the case, which only deepened the mystery and my unease. The vanishing man, the abandoned car, the bullet hole in the shack, it all remained an unsolved puzzle, a chilling reminder of the hidden darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of a quiet, rural town. The weeks that followed the discovery of the shack were filled with a gnawing sense of anticipation and frustration. I kept checking the local news, hoping for an update, a lead, anything that would shed light on the mystery of the abandoned car and the bullet hole. But the news remained silent, or at least silent on the details that truly mattered. The official reports were vague, focusing on the ongoing investigation without revealing any substantial progress. It was as if the entire incident had been swallowed by the quiet vastness of the Montana landscape, leaving only whispers and unanswered questions in its wake. My conversations with Benjamin became increasingly strained. He, too, was frustrated by the lack of information, by the police's tight-lipped approach. He confirmed that the sheriff's office had indeed taken over the scene completely, effectively shutting out any external involvement, even from other emergency services. This secrecy only deepened my suspicion. Why the lockdown? What were they trying to hide, or perhaps, what were they struggling to understand? The idea that there was no foul play, as initially reported, seemed increasingly ludicrous given the bullet hole and the sudden disappearance of the car's owner. The media's initial narrative felt like a carefully constructed facade, designed to calm public fears rather than to inform. I couldn't shake the image of that single clean bullet hole in the shack wall. It was a stark, violent punctuation mark in an otherwise serene landscape. What had transpired in that isolated, forgotten structure? Was it a struggle? An execution? And if so, where was the body? Where was the evidence that should have accompanied such an event? The absence of a shell casing, a slug, or any trace of blood was perplexing. It suggested a level of meticulousness, a deliberate effort to erase any signs of what had happened. This wasn't a random act of violence. It felt calculated, precise, and deeply disturbing. The thought that I had driven past that car, not once but twice, that I had been so close to the epicenter of this unfolding drama, filled me with a strange mix of guilt and fascination. Had I missed something? A subtle detail, a fleeting glance that could have provided a crucial clue? The image of the driver's side door hanging open, like a silent scream, replayed in my mind. It spoke of haste, of an abrupt departure, of someone leaving in a hurry and never looking back. But why? And who was the person who had been driving that car? What was their story, and what fate had befallen them? My small town, usually a haven of predictability, now felt tinged with an undercurrent of menace. The familiar farmlands and low hills, once comforting in their monotony, now seemed to hold secrets, their quiet beauty masking a darker reality. I found myself scanning the roads more intently, my eyes lingering on abandoned vehicles, on secluded patches of woods. The innocence of my rural upbringing had been subtly, irrevocably shattered. The world, I realized, was far more complex and dangerous than I had ever imagined, even in the most unassuming of places. Returning to the first narrative, the memory of the basement and its unseen occupant continued to plague me even after I left for college. The distance did little to quell my anxiety. If anything, it amplified it. My parents, bless their hearts, tried to reassure me, insisting they would handle everything, that the house would be safe. But their words felt hollow, a thin veneer over a terrifying reality. How could they be safe when a stranger, a potentially dangerous individual, had been living beneath their very feet, unnoticed, for an unknown period of time? I called them almost daily, my questions always circling back to the same unsettling themes. Had they found anything else? Had the police made any progress? Had the person returned? Each time the answer was the same, nothing new. But that nothing new was precisely what terrified me. It meant the mystery remained unsolved. The threat still lingered. The phantom presence in the house I once called home. The images of the basement, particularly the scratch marks and the demonic drawings, were seared into my mind. They weren't just random doodles. They were deliberate, unsettling expressions of a disturbed mind. What kind of person would create such things? What dark rituals or twisted thoughts had occupied their time in that hidden space? The thought of my parents living above such a place, unknowingly sharing their home with such a person, sent shivers down my spine. I tried to imagine the police investigation, the forensic team sifting through the debris, but the reality was that they had found nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA, no personal belongings that could identify the individual. It was as if this person was a ghost, leaving only a trail of fear and disturbing art. My sleep became restless, haunted by the aggressive banging I had heard that final night. The image of the figure sprinting into the darkness was a recurring nightmare. I kept replaying the scene, trying to conjure details I might have missed, a facial feature, a distinguishing piece of clothing, anything that could provide a clue. But it was always the same, a shadowy silhouette, a fleeting presence swallowed by the night. The helplessness I felt was overwhelming. I was miles away, unable to protect my parents, unable to contribute to solving the mystery that had invaded our lives. I found myself constantly checking my phone, jumping at every notification, hoping for a call from my parents, yet dreading what that call might bring. The silence was almost worse than any news because it left too much to the imagination, too much room for fear to fester. I knew I had to focus on my studies, on the new chapter of my life, but a part of me remained tethered to that old house, to the secrets it held, and to the unknown entity that had claimed a part of it. The experience had fundamentally altered my perception of safety, of home, and of the thin veil that separates the ordinary from the truly terrifying. The world, I was learning, was full of hidden basements and vanishing men, and sometimes the most unsettling truths were the ones that remained just out of reach. Whispering from the shadows, this duality of fear, one rooted in the tangible threat of an unknown intruder in my childhood home, and the other in the chilling enigma of a vanished man in my quiet hometown, has left an indelible mark. Both experiences serve as stark reminders that even in the most familiar and seemingly safe environments, there can be hidden depths of mystery and danger waiting to be uncovered. And sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that remain unfinished, their endings lost in the shadows, leaving us forever to wonder,